Detective Michael Hayes sat in the cramped, dimly lit office, staring at the stack of case files in front of him. His fingers drummed nervously on the wood of his desk, each beat echoing the growing sense of unease that had taken root in his gut. It had been a long week. A week spent chasing shadows, trying to piece together a case that seemed to be slipping further and further from his grasp. At the heart of it was the criminal trial that had gripped the city, the one that could bring down one of the most powerful crime syndicates the department had ever seen. The key to breaking the case wide open was a witness. A man named Victor Malone. Malone was a former enforcer for the syndicate, a man who had lived in the shadows for years. But after a botched hit, he had turned on his employers. He had agreed to testify, and with his testimony, the police had a chance to dismantle the entire criminal empire. But now, just days before he was supposed to take the stand, Malone had vanished. Hayes had been assigned to track down the missing witness. The disappearance was strange, too clean, too calculated. It wasn't like Malone to simply run. Hayes had seen him in person only once, but there had been something in the man's eyes that told him he wasn't the type to back down, not even under threat of death. He picked up the phone, dialing his partner's number. Detective Sarah Lynn was his only ally in this case, a woman who had earned Hayes' trust after years of working together. When she answered, her voice was tight, strained. "Hayes," she said, "we need to talk. Now." The urgency in her tone caught him off guard. He grabbed his coat and rushed out of his office, heading for the parking lot. Lynn was already waiting by their car, her arms crossed, eyes scanning the surrounding area. "What's going on?" Hayes asked, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. "Malone's not just missing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been taken." Hayes' stomach dropped. "What do you mean, taken?" "We've checked every lead. No sign of him." Lynn shook her head. "It's worse than that. I've been digging into the case. Malone wasn't the first person to go missing in the last week. There's a pattern. And I think it goes higher than we realize. Someone in the department's involved." Hayes froze, the words sinking in. "Are you saying?" Lynn nodded grimly. "I'm saying we've got a leak. Someone on the inside is feeding information to the syndicate. And they knew Malone was about to testify. They took him before he could talk. The implications were staggering. The very people he worked with, the ones he had trusted, might be involved in this. The idea was almost impossible to process, but Hayes knew Lynn wouldn't be making accusations without solid evidence. "Where do we start?" Hayes asked, his voice low. "We need to get to Malone's safe house. There's a chance someone tipped them off. If we can find out who had access, we might find a lead." The drive to the safe house was tense, the silence between them thick with the weight of the investigation. Malone had been placed in the safest location the department had, a nondescript apartment in a quiet part of town, heavily guarded. But now it was empty. The door was ajar, and there were signs of a struggle inside. Hayes stepped over the threshold, his eyes scanning the room. It was a mess, papers scattered, overturned furniture, broken glass. Someone had been looking for something. Or had been trying to send a message. "The place was cleared out in a hurry," Lynn muttered. Whoever took him knew exactly what they were looking for. Hayes moved to the desk, pulling open the drawers. One of them was empty, but the others contained scattered papers and a few personal items. A photograph of Malone and his daughter. A few old newspapers. Nothing of significance. But then, his hand brushed against something small, tucked into the back corner of the bottom drawer. It was a file. A folder, half hidden under a pile of papers, its edges worn. Hayes opened it cautiously, his breath catching when he saw the contents. It was a list of names, all redacted except for one, Detective Daniel Cross. "Who the hell is Cross?" Hayes muttered under his breath. Lynn stepped over to him, looking over his shoulder. "He's one of the officers working on the case." "But why would he be on Malone's file?" Maybe he's the leak, Hayes said, his mind racing. We need to find him. Now. But as they turned to leave the apartment, they heard something, a soft, creaking noise, followed by the sound of a door opening. They froze, hearts pounding. Hayes motioned for Lynn to stay quiet as he moved toward the hallway. He could hear footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate. Someone was coming. Back door, Lynn whispered urgently, pulling him toward the rear exit. They rushed out into the alley, but as they rounded the corner, they came face to face with a man holding a gun. Cross. Did you really think you could stop this? He sneered, his voice cold and detached. Hayes didn't hesitate. His instincts kicked in, and he reached for his weapon, but before he could draw, Cross fired. The bullet missed by inches, grazing his shoulder. Hayes returned fire, the shot landing squarely in Cross's chest. The officer crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the pavement. Lynn moved quickly, checking the body. We need to get out of here. Now. This is going to make things worse. As they fled, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The deeper they dug, the more tangled the web became. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had suspected, and it was clear now that the people they trusted most were part of the syndicate's plan. In the days that followed, the investigation spiraled out of control. Malone's disappearance became the focus of the press, and the department was under scrutiny. But Hayes and Lynn knew they couldn't stop now. The answers they sought were still out there, hidden behind layers of lies and deceit. The syndicate had been operating in the shadows for years, and now it seemed they had infiltrated the very department that was supposed to bring them down. Hayes realized that if they didn't expose the corruption soon, it would be too late. The investigation had become a race against time, and every step forward felt like a step into darkness. As the trial date approached, the stakes grew higher. Hayes and Lynn followed every lead, each one leading them deeper into a world they hadn't known existed. Their lives were at risk now, and they were no longer just hunting criminals, they were hunting for their own survival. Finally, after days of chasing shadows, they found the one person who could end it all, Malone. He had been kept hidden, kept alive, waiting for the right moment to make his move. They brought him in, and his testimony would expose everything, the corruption, the betrayals, the lies. But as the courtroom filled, and Malone took the stand, Hayes had one last realization. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The syndicate would stop at nothing to protect their empire, and now, with Malone's testimony, they had everything to lose. Hayes and Lynn would have to keep their wits about them. The game was far from finished. The real battle was just starting.